Hey everybody, so in this first video, we are going to talk about the different components of a budget and the kind of examples you will see when it comes to looking at a budget and answering different questions. So the definition, actually, you know what, before we get started, if you want to go ahead and pause this video, we're going to go over the definitions. We're going to go over the two different categories of a budget, and then we're going to do an example down at the bottom of this page. Pause this video and copy down this format real quick, and then we'll get started. Okay, so the definition of a budget is a way to plan and track your expenses. So I'm going to use my green pen since we're going to talk about money. So a budget is a way to plan and track expenses. You may have seen members of your family have a monthly budget to make sure that you plan out your money accordingly, so that way you have enough money to do different things. So in a budget, there are different kinds of expenses or costs that you may have. And some of them are fixed and some of them are what are called variable costs. So a fixed cost is a cost that does not change. It's a cost that does not change. That's why I have the little star there, so you can kind of see the definition. Okay, a fixed cost does not change. A variable cost, much like the variable. Okay, I didn't know if you heard the interruption. I had a student, you know who you are if you're watching this video, come in and talk to me. So a fixed cost is a cost that does not change. A variable cost is a cost that does change. So much like a variable in an equation, the cost of certain things can vary. It just may depend on the time of the year, the time of the month, etc. So some examples of each. So fixed costs that typically don't ever change. So if you pay rent or any sort of mortgage on a house, that is typically a cost that stays the same every single month. If you have a car payment that you need to make, that typically stays the same every single month. Things like our phone or the internet, so like our Netflix account, any sort of subscription service that we have for our phone, how much we pay for the Wi-Fi, those are typically always the same every single month. They do not change. And then something else that typically never changes is if we have a savings account or a retirement account, some sort of account that we're putting money into, we typically always put the same amount of money into that account every single month, because we're trying to save money for a future vacation or for our retirement or whatever. So these are things that do not change typically over the course of a month. However, depending on the time of the year, there could be costs that do change. So some examples of variable costs include, how much we pay for water. So if you take a lot of showers, or if it's really hot outside and you're drinking a lot of water, you may use more water certain months than other months. Same thing with other things like electricity. We typically use more electricity in the summer here in Texas because of the air conditioning. Things like your groceries. Some months you may spend more or less on groceries. Gas. So I don't know if your parents have been talking about the current gas prices we have. Gas right now is very expensive. So last month and this month, your parents are probably paying more, or your siblings, whoever's driving in your household, probably paying more for gas than in previous months. And then sometimes, depending on the time of the year, we have expenses like clothing or gifts. So, when it comes time for back to school, we may spend more on clothing. When it's around the holiday season, we may spend more on gifts. So, depending on the time of the year, those kind of costs can change. So these are just examples of fixed and variable costs, but both of these kind of costs make up a budget. So a lot of times what you're going to see is what's called a snapshot. So a budget is a snapshot, just a quick look at someone's finances. It's just telling you how much money they have for different things right now. We're going to talk about if we looked at someone's wealth. Wealth is a person's essentially money over the course of their life or over the course of time. It's not just a snapshot of what's going on with their finances right now. So a budget is just a snapshot. So here's an example. You can pause the video to copy down the example and the question that we're going to answer. I'll give you some time to do that if you want to pause and copy it down. Okay, so in this example, instead of telling us for this person's budget how much they're paying for rent, how much they're paying for gas, how much they're paying for utilities. Utilities are things like your water, your electricity, that kind of stuff. They just broke it down by percentage. So 30% of their budget is going to rent, 5% is going to gas, 16% is going to utilities, and that's a 4. 49% is going to other things. So probably stuff like the phone, the internet, car payment, savings account, all that kinds of stuff. So if they tell us that this person's total expenses, so if they added up all of these expenses or costs, is equal to $2,400 or $2,400, how much is their rent? So the question we have to solve is, what is 30%, since rent is 30% of $2,400. So the way that we take percentage is we convert our percent to a decimal or a fraction. So I'm just going to put decimal or fraction. And then we're going to multiply by our total number, or our total amount of expenses, to figure out what portion of it is considered for rent. So our decimal for 30%, well, actually, let's do the fraction first. Percent means out of 100. So our fraction is 30 hundredths. 30 out of 100 would be the fraction. 30% means 30 out of 100. So as a decimal, the way I could write 30 hundredths, 0.30, I end it in the hundredth place, or this is the same thing as 0.3. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take either the fraction or the decimal and multiply it times 2,400. I'm going to just do the decimal because I think multiplying with the decimal is easier than a fraction. So if I do that math over here, 0.3 times 2,400, we can think about what is 3 times 24, which is 72. But then I have these 2 zeros that I need to tack on. But then I have 1 decimal place, so I'm going to move in my decimal place once. So 30% of 2,400 is equal to 72.0, which is just $720. So they are paying $720 for rent, which you may think is a lot of money, but for the cost of living in Austin, that's actually pretty cheap rent. My rent is like $1,200 and I have a 1-bedroom apartment. So this is pretty cheap. So who knows what kind of place they live in to get a place for $720 a month, but that is their rent. So 30% of their budget goes to rent. So 30% of 2,400 is $720. And all we did was take that percentage, put it as a decimal or a fraction, and then we multiplied it times 2,400. So it may give you the prices and it wants you to figure out what is the percent of their budget. So it may have told us the rent is 720. What percent of their budget is rent? So you would have to do 720 over 2,400 and convert that fraction to a percent, which you do have notes on and which we have been practicing when we've been doing all of our stuff about data. So that might be another example of how the question's asked. But these are all the components of a budget. This is an example of how you may see it. So utilize this example in these notes when you need help later in your work.